The opinions expressed in the following sermon are the preacher's personal views and do not always reflect those of the North Platte Baptist Church. We only ask that you take Acts 17:11 to heart and search the scriptures daily to see whether these things are so.
All right, I'm going to ask you tonight to please open your Bible to the book of Genesis, Genesis chapter 42. Genesis chapter 42. I wanted to use a book in the Bible tonight that even Brother David could find. So open to the book of Genesis chapter 42. And when you find that book in the Bible, that place in the Bible, I'm going to ask you to hold that like we did this morning and then go to Job chapter 1. So Genesis chapter 42 and then Job chapter 1. By the way, I very much enjoyed that special. You know, some songs perform and some songs prepare. And that song prepared my heart. That song personally spoke to me, and I really appreciated it, and it helped me tonight. Genesis 42, did you find that? And then did you find Job chapter 1? Now I'm going to ask you to hold both of those places, and we're going to go one more place. I promise you just one more, and we're going to go to the book of Proverbs, and that's where we're going to start. We're going to start the book of Proverbs, chapter 19. So find Genesis 42 and mark that, and then Job 1 and mark that, and then if you will go to Proverbs chapter 19, that's where we're going to begin. And I will say about tomorrow night's class, I am teaching some of the material in the class tomorrow night that I teach in one of my classes at our college, the college your pastor attended, and he and his wife both attended, and the material I'm teaching tomorrow night and Tuesday night is not just some stuffy college, something that somebody has to learn so they can get a degree. What I'm going to teach you Monday and Tuesday night, it'll transform your marriage. It'll transform any relationship you have with any person. And specifically, it'll help you on your job. Much of what I'm going to teach both nights is geared towards helping you with whatever role you have in life, working with someone else, a spouse, a family member, a friend, but especially on your job. You can take what I teach Monday night and Tuesday night and go back to work and get a promotion, I guarantee you. So it'll help you if you want to come. And if you can't stay for the entire time, if they're coming as I'm going to call them a visitor, or they're welcome to just come for an hour or two. Okay, good. We're going to have 3 sessions, 6:30 and approximately 7:30 and approximately 8:30, and you can come for any or all of those. We'd love to have you. All right, did I talk long enough for you to find all 3 of those places? We're going to begin in the book of Proverbs chapter 19. What I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to show you a verse in the Bible that has been the Bible talks about the mysteries of God. There are some things about God that I don't understand. And I'm glad I have a God that I can't understand. If I could understand everything there is to understand about God, well, God would be no bigger than I am. And I need a God who's bigger than me that can help me. And so tonight I'm going to show you one of those verses that has been a mystery to me. Look at chapter 19. We're going to read verse 23. The fear of the Lord tendeth to life, and he that hath it is referring to the fear of the Lord. So the verse says, the fear of the Lord tendeth to life, and he that hath the fear of the Lord shall abide satisfied. He shall not be visited with evil. Now, this verse seems to clearly say, if I fear the Lord, I will not be visited with evil. But I'm going to have to admit, there are quite a few people that I know of that feared the Lord, that it seems like to me that they were affected by the evil that was brought upon them. They were affected by the evil that someone else did to them. Hold your place there in Proverbs, because we're going to come back there in a minute, and go to the book of Genesis, and I'll show you an example of what I'm talking about. Genesis chapter 42. Hold your place in Proverbs, but go to Genesis chapter 42. And in Genesis chapter 42, I want to look at verse 18. Genesis 42:18 says, and Joseph said unto them the 3rd day, this do and live, for I fear God. There it is, as plain as it can be in black and white. Joseph said, I fear God. But isn't it true that Joseph's brothers threw him in a pit so he could starve to death? Doesn't that sound evil to you? Isn't it true that Joseph was sold as a slave by his own brothers? Doesn't that sound evil to you? Isn't it true that Joseph was lied about by Potiphar's wife? That sounds evil to me. Isn't it true that Joseph was cast into prison when he wasn't even guilty? But I thought Proverbs 19:23 said, the fear of the Lord tendeth to life, and he that hath it shall not be visited with evil. Well, let me show you another example I was thinking of. Look at Job chapter 1. Now, maybe Joseph just said, I fear the Lord. Maybe that's the explanation. Maybe he said, I fear the Lord, but maybe he didn't really fear the Lord. Maybe that's the explanation. Or maybe Joseph was sincere when he said, I fear the Lord, but maybe he just didn't understand what it meant to fear the Lord. Maybe that's the explanation. Well, let's look at Job chapter 1 and verse 1. There was a man in the land of Uz, that's Uz, not Oz. We're not going to see the wizard. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. Now, if you would look down at verse 8. And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect man and upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil? Even God himself said about Job that Job feared the Lord. But do you remember the day that Job was in his house and he was fasting and praying for his children? Job had 10 children, and Job said, as far as I know, all 10 of my children are right with God. He said, but just in case, there might be a chance that maybe one of my 10 children could have possibly said something in his heart against God, not even said it out loud, but maybe he might have just said something in his heart against God. He said, I think I'll fast and pray for my children. And so Job did. He was fasting and praying for his children. And on that very day, one of Job's servants came running in the house, and he said, Job, several of your servants and I were in the field, and we were taking care of the livestock, and the enemy came, and they attacked. And Job, they killed every one of your servants except for me. I'm the only one who escaped to come and tell you that the enemy stole 1,000 of your oxen and 500 of your donkeys. And before he could get the words out of his mouth, another servant came running through the door. And he said, Job, several of your servants and I, we were in the field and we were taking care of the sheep. And Job, this fire began to fall out of heaven. And Job, when it did, it killed every one of your servants except for me. I'm the only one who escaped to come and tell you that the fire killed 7,000 of your sheep. And before he could get the words out of his mouth, a third servant came running through the door, and he said, Job, several of your servants and I, we were in the field, we were taking care of the camels, and an enemy came, a different one from before, and they attacked, and they killed every one of your servants except for me. I'm the only one who escaped to come and tell you that the enemy stole 3,000 of your camels. And before he could get the words out of his mouth, a fourth servant comes stumbling through the door. He's disheveled, covered with dust. His hair's messed up. He's breathing heavy. He's red in the face, perspiring. And he says, Job, I don't know how to tell you. I was at your oldest son's house. In fact, several of your servants and I were there. And we were serving a feast to all 10 of your children. And he said, Job, in the middle of that feast, a great wind came out of the wilderness, and it blew down all 4 corners of the house. And he said, Job, when it did, it killed every one of your servants, except for me. I'm the only one who escaped to come and tell you that all 10 of your children are dead. But I thought Proverbs 19:23 said, the fear of the Lord tendeth to life, and he that hath it shall not be visited with evil. Noah feared the Lord. You remember what God said about Noah? By faith, Noah, moved with fear, prepared an ark. But you remember what happened to Noah? After the flood, one of his sons saw his nakedness, and God cursed his entire family. David feared the Lord. God himself said about David, a man after mine own heart. But you remember what happened to David? David had a son named Amnon, and his son forced his own sister Tamar there in their house, and David's other son Absalom got so mad at Amnon that he murdered him, and then later Absalom got so mad at David that he stole the kingdom from him. And when David's forces came back to take the city back, David gave very clear instructions: don't let anything happen to my son Absalom. But David's own nephew Joab found Absalom in a defenseless position and murdered him in cold blood. John the Baptist feared the Lord. Remember what Jesus said? He said, among them that are born of women, there hath not risen a greater than John the Baptist. You remember what happened to John the Baptist, don't you? He got his head cut off. And I don't know about you, but in my lifetime, I had never really heard of anybody getting their head cut off. You know, I'd read about it in history books, World War II and so forth. But until just recent years, now we've heard about it ourselves right here in America. It's even happened to some Americans. And every time I hear about it, I just cringe and think how evil that is. Paul, he feared the Lord. Remember what Paul said about himself? He said, I received stripes above measure. Paul said, they beat me on my back so many times with the whip that I have scars that crisscross my back to the point I can't even count them anymore. He said, in prisons more frequent. Paul said, when I go to town to preach, they don't put me in a nice room in the Fairfield Inn and give me a basket full of grapes and chocolate and apples and crackers and everything else under the sun. He said, no, they put me in prison when I go to town to preach. He said, in death's oft. Paul said several times I went out to preach, and some of the men that were with me got murdered because they were trying to preach the gospel. He said 5 times 40 stripes save one, thrice beaten with rods, once stoned, thrice shipwrecked, in perils of water, in perils of robbers, in perils by my own countrymen, by the heathen, in the city, in the wilderness, in the sea, among false brethren. Paul said, I've suffered weariness, painfulness, hunger, thirst, cold, nakedness. But I thought Proverbs 19:23 said, the fear of the Lord tendeth to life, and he that hath it shall not be visited with evil. Well, what does it mean to fear the Lord? Okay, if you would go back to the book of Proverbs, and this time look at chapter 8, please. Book of Proverbs, and let's go to chapter 8. And in chapter 8, I'm going to read one little phrase from verse 13. Proverbs chapter 8. And I'm going to read the beginning words in verse 13. It says, the fear of the Lord is to hate evil. Now, I don't know about you, but I hate the evil that somebody else tries to do to me. In fact, I would assume that everybody hates the evil that somebody else is going to try to do to them. And if that's the evil that verse is talking about, then everybody in the whole world fears the Lord. But we know that's not true. Right. So what evil is it talking about? Okay, turn over to chapter 16 if you would please. In Proverbs chapter 16. And this time I'm going to look at verse 6. Proverbs 16:6 says, by mercy and truth iniquity is purged, and by the fear of the Lord men depart from evil. Now, if I have to depart from the evil that somebody else is trying to do to me in order to fear the Lord, well, there's sometimes I can't get away from the evil that somebody else is trying to do to me. You remember what happened to Paul? You remember when Paul was in Iconium and they threatened to stone him, and Paul found out about it. So he left Iconium and he went down to Lystra. And while he was down there in Lystra, the folks from Iconium came down to Lystra, and the Bible said they stirred up the people in Lystra. And then the people from Iconium and the people from Lystra ganged up, and they stoned Paul, and they drug him outside the city and left him for dead. Paul tried to get away from the evil that somebody else was going to do to him by leaving one town and going to another, but he couldn't get away. They followed him and still did the evil. Well, let's go back to Proverbs 19, verse 23. And let's read the verse again. The fear of the Lord tendeth to life. And he that hath it, he that hath the fear of the Lord, shall abide satisfied. He shall not be visited with evil. Oh, you know what? I think I see it now. This verse means if I fear the Lord, no evil will visit me. No evil will visit my heart. No evil will visit my soul. If I fear the Lord, no evil will come to visit my mind. In other words, if I fear the Lord, no evil intentions will come into my heart so that I will not be tempted to do evil to somebody else. You know, the problem I often have is when I read the Bible, I read it from a selfish viewpoint. I sometimes read the Bible simply looking for something in the Bible that will bless me. Sometimes when I read the Bible, I look at it as a shield to protect me from all the bad guys. You know, if I carry my Bible everywhere I go and I read it enough, then maybe it'll keep the vampires away. You know, that's the way that's the way we treat the Bible sometimes. But you know, sometimes when I read the Bible becomes a shield to protect you from me. You remember what Jesus said to his disciples? Jesus said to his disciples, you don't need to turn there, but I'll look at it in Mark chapter 7. It says, do you not perceive, or do you not understand, that whatsoever thing from without entereth into the man, it cannot defile him. But that which cometh out of the man, that defileth him. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, and it lists several others. And then he goes on to say, all these evil things come from within and defile a man. Do you understand that there is no evil that you can bring upon me that will defile me, that will destroy me, but the evil that I have in my heart towards you, that will destroy me, that will defile me. The verse says, the fear of the Lord tendeth to life, and he that hath it shall abide satisfied. Do you know that you can be satisfied while somebody else tries to do evil to you? Have you ever tried to get somebody's goat? You ever tried to say something to them to get at them? Have you ever tried? And they just keep right on smiling like like as if they don't even realize what you're doing. You know, you can be satisfied while somebody else does evil to you, but you cannot be satisfied while you do evil to somebody else. In fact, I'll go beyond that and say you cannot be satisfied while you even harbor evil that you let visit your heart towards somebody else. You know, sometimes when I don't do the evil to you that I want to do, it's not because I'm pious. It's not because I'm righteous. It's because I'm chicken. I'm scared. I'm afraid. I'm afraid if I do the evil to you that I feel in my heart that God will break my leg. Or I'm afraid you've got a brother bigger than I am. Or worse than that, I'm afraid somebody will tell Mama that I did it. And sometimes the only reason we don't do the evil that we want to do to somebody else is not because we're righteous. It's because we're scared to do it, but we enjoy letting the evil come visit our heart. Have you ever thought the same thing I've thought? If she says that one more time, or the next time he says that, or the next time he does that. Have you ever been in a situation where somebody said something to you and you wanted to say something back so bad, but you just couldn't think of what to say? And about 30 minutes later or 2 days later, you said, boy, I should have said, the next time I'm going to. Okay, you know what that is? We enjoy that evil visiting in our heart. We enjoy it. In fact, sometimes I've let evil stay in my heart so long it wasn't a visitor anymore. It owed rent because it stayed so long. Amen. The fear of the Lord tendeth to life. You know, we say a man tendeth to his garden. Or we say I'm going to tend to that business this afternoon. What the fear of the Lord does is it puts life in order. It tidies up your life. It makes life more productive. What we need to do tonight is we need to fear the Lord and tidy up our hearts and get some of that evil out of our hearts, some of that bitterness out of our heart, some of those evil thoughts we've had in our heart. No, we're not ever going to poke him in the nose because we're not brave enough to do it. No, we're not ever going to tell her how we really feel because we're not brave enough to do it. But we sure enjoy thinking about how good it would feel if I did say it. But the Bible says the fear of the Lord is to hate evil, hate the evil that I have in my heart towards you. By the fear of the Lord, men depart from evil, depart from the evil that I have in my heart towards you. Now don't let this scare you, but that was my introduction. Now I'm going to preach my sermon. And here's my sermon. Anything that we don't understand about God is simply that. We don't understand. It's not that God's wrong. It's not that God's bad. It's not that God's evil or inconsistent or untrustworthy or untruthful or unfair. It's not that God let us down. It's not that God didn't keep His word. It's simply we didn't understand what God said. You know, there's nothing in this book that's untrue. There's nothing in this book that God hasn't kept the word that He said. There's nothing in here, but there are some things in here I don't understand. And until I understand them, it's my job to just believe that they're true and realize I don't understand them. I remember the morning I was in my office on our campus. My office is down at the end of a hallway up on the second floor. Has some windows in it that overlooks the lake there on our campus. And I was in my office one morning a little before daylight, as I am most mornings when I'm in town. And I was reading my Bible. And I came to Proverbs 19:23. And Proverbs 19:23 said, the fear of the Lord tendeth to life, and he that hath it shall abide satisfied. He shall not be visited with evil. And I said in my heart to God, if that's so, then what about John the Baptist? I said, if that's true, then explain Paul the Apostle to me. I said, okay, God, if that's true, what about Joseph? I said, God, if that's true, then explain Job to me. And as clearly as I'm speaking to you right now, I didn't hear God with my ears. Only Oral Roberts does that. But I heard God speak to me, to my heart, as clearly as I'm speaking to you right now. And God said the evil I'm talking about in that verse is the evil you have in your heart. And God was so brazen, He even called the person's name. And I had to get out of my chair behind my desk and get on my knees, and with tears running down my cheeks, I had to confess my sin. I said, sin. No, I had never poked him in the nose. No, I had never said anything evil to him. In fact, I believe it's an accurate statement to say I'd never said anything evil about him. But I had to confess my sin of letting that evil visit my heart. And I wish I could say, bless God, from that day to this, I've never had another evil, but I can't say that. I've had to tidy up my heart several times. I've had to tend to that bitterness that comes back and creeps in once in a while. Would you admit tonight, has there ever been a time in your life that you let some evil visit your heart? Has there ever been a time in your life when you accidentally opened the door at the wrong moment and he stepped in before you knew who was coming? And there you were feeling this evil towards somebody or this bitterness towards somebody, and it might have even been God towards whom you felt the bitterness. But I'm telling you tonight that you'll never be satisfied as long as you let that evil continue to visit your heart. But what you could do tonight is you could, like I did, get on your knees and confess the sin of letting that evil visit your heart. And ask God to tidy up your heart, get that bitterness out. And you may say, well, Brother Young, I did that once before. I know, but isn't it amazing how easy it is for evil to creep back in. I don't know about you, but I have to go back and go back and go back. But you know, every time I kick that evil out and lock the door behind him, it's a little longer before he comes back next time. And those are the most satisfying days in my life. Those few days, few moments, maybe once in a while, a few weeks, I go without that evil visiting my heart. I hope someday it'll be, he'll take a sabbatical and not come back for a year or more. But meanwhile, I'm thankful that God allows me to come back. And have you ever tidied up your work shed? No, you probably never have. But have you ladies ever tidied up your kitchen cabinet? Isn't it amazing how quick it gets untidied and you have to go back and do it again? Tonight, some of us might need to tidy up our heart. Let's have every head bowed and every eye closed. Who's here tonight that would admit, yes, you're right. There have been some times in my life when I realized there was some evil visiting my heart, some bitterness I had in my heart towards someone else. And you would admit that, yes, there have been some times that I've had to deal with that. Are you like me? Can you admit that it's happened to you before? Would you raise your hand tonight? Would you admit that tonight? Thank you. You may put it down. Now, there may be somebody here tonight who says, in fact, he's been there to visit recently, and I need to deal with that tonight. Father, I pray tonight that you'll help us. Help every one of us to admit that I'm human, I'm flesh, I'm totally depraved, and over and over and over I find myself with that visitor, that unwanted visitor dwelling there in my heart. Father, help me tonight. Help all of us to deal with that. Help us to tidy up our life, tidy up our heart, tidy up our mind, our soul, our feelings towards someone or someone's. Now, with heads bowed and eyes closed, could you stand at this time with us, please?